Phone.
You're now live.
Oh, we're live.
We got something going on with our camera. What just happened?
Something is going on technologically again, but here we are 3 weeks in a row. Hey guys, welcome. It's Wednesday evening. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Joe.
And this is ToJo Live.
Welcome to ToJo Live.
All right. Hopefully you heard that intro. Did you hear the intro, Joe?
I did.
Okay. It didn't make any sound on our end, so since it came through, hopefully it came through on the others as well.
There we go.
Hey guys, welcome to ToJo Live, where we are here to discuss your questions about life, faith, and the church. And we need your questions, okay? We're running out of stuff. We're emptying our bucket looking here. So any questions that you may have, don't feel like it's a dumb question. If you've got a question, there's probably other people out there that have the same or similar question, and they're just afraid to ask. And so if you ask, that can answer the question for a number of different people out there. And we would love to bring you on screen and ask that question. But if you're more comfortable just putting it in the chat box, then obviously we can do that as well. And any prayer requests that you may have, please put that up in the chat box, and we will pray for each and every one as they come up. All right, a verse for the day. We are out of Philippians now. And I picked a verse from Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. And it says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's that's an encouraging verse because it says that God is there for us. Listen, we don't have the power to deal with everything that comes our way. We don't. Sometimes we like to think we can, and we may develop where we could do a little better than we have in the past, but none of us get to the point where we can do it on our own. And the fact that we have God there, that it's not so much as God being on our side, but we're on God's side, so it puts us on the same side, which is the side you want to be on. Because God, the amazing thing about God is he is the most powerful thing in all of existence. Yet he is also the most loving and gentle thing in all of existence. And he loves you, and he cares for you, and he wants the best for you, and he's there for you. His power will strengthen you and help you. Doesn't mean he's going to remove all your problems, but it does mean that he is there with every problem and through every problem and will help you in the process. And you know what happens as God helps you through those problems? You actually develop and become stronger. And that's what that verse says. It says, I will strengthen you. I will strengthen you. We will become stronger because God walks with us through our problems. So here's the quote. And I tried to find the source of this quote, and I couldn't find it. I saw it attributed to a couple of different people. Some people contributed it to Jim Rohn. Some people contributed it to John Maxwell. Most of the places that I saw it had it as an anonymous quote. So that's how I'm listing it, is as anonymous. But listen to this quote. "If you do not like what you are reaping, change what you are sowing." That's powerful right there, folks. If you do not like what you are reaping, change what you are sowing. If you are planting stuff in a garden, if you're wanting watermelon, but you plant corn, you're going to get corn, and you're going to be disappointed because you really wanted watermelon. Or if you plant tomatoes, but you really want beans, when that comes out, you're going to be disappointed because you really wanted beans, but you planted tomatoes. Listen, If you plant hatred, meaning you treat people badly and you treat people harshly, you're going to receive that back. And if you don't like it, stop planting it. Plant what you want. Plant into other people what you would like to have. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately. When you plant something in the ground, it has to go through a period of time before you actually see fruit from that. And some things, it's years. There are some like trees that have to, once you plant them, it's years before they come up and actually develop fruit from those. You eventually get what you planted, but you got to be patient. So just because you're automatically nice to somebody doesn't mean, oh wow, thank you, I'm going to be nice to you now. That's not the way it happens. Sometimes you got to be patient. You got to wait. And I will say that not all ground is fertile. If I go out here and there's just some old dry dirt and I try to plant in that, it may not grow. But if I find some fertile soil, it's more likely to grow. And it's the same way with people. And listen, there's some people, they're just not fertile. And if you plant in them, they're not going to grow. So you may be disappointed in that. But find the people that are fertile and plant in them. And it goes beyond just people. You know, when you learn, when you get an education, whether it's a formal education through school or it's an education through the reading of a book or watching of videos or just taking a training or going to a conference or whatever the case may be, you're planting when you do that. Doesn't mean you're going to come out of that and be, successful or doing whatever it is you learned how to do great all of a sudden. Why? Because after you plant, it takes a period of time for that to produce fruit. But if you plant the good stuff, if you get the education, if you learn stuff, if you read the books, you watch the videos, you learn from other people that are doing what you would like to do, then eventually you're going to be able to produce fruit as well. If you do not like what you are reaping, change what you are sowing. How are you tonight, my friend?
Brother, I'm doing great. It's Wednesday night. We're here again together, which I love, and I love the quote. You can't sow it. You can't sow something great if you can't reap something great if you don't sow it. My dad used to have a lot of different sayings, and one of the things he said to me, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, exchange one word for another, but he said, "Son, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken poop." He didn't use the word poop, but I put it in there. But it's true. You can't put a little effort into something and get something great out of it. What you put into anything, whether it's a relationship or a job or an education or anything, you can't get something great out of putting things that are mediocre.
Yep.
When you plant things that are good, then you can make them great. If you plant things that are great, they can be exceptional.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that's I like what you said there right at the end. I liked everything you said, but especially there at the end, when you plant something great, it can become exceptional. Listen, oftentimes when you plant, you do get more than what you planted. You may plant a few seeds in a garden and you get an abundance of fruit from that. And oftentimes that happens in other ways as well. You may take a training or go to a conference or something, and man, there's something. It may be a full day conference, and there's something that's said in a 2-minute period that produces fruit, an abundance of fruit, and you're like, wow, I never thought about that. It changes your whole way of seeing things and how you act on that. Now, you do got to act on that. Just like in a garden, when you plant, you don't just put a seed in the ground and walk away and then come back, 4 weeks later and you've got fruit. You gotta care for that. You gotta water it. You gotta make sure you keep the weeds pulled and all of that stuff. When you learn something, you gotta water that. You gotta fertilize that. And you do that by, putting it into practice and maybe learning more about that subject when you learn something. The way I got into life coaching, I'd never heard of life coaching. This would have been in '05. And I was actually taking some classes in counseling, working toward a master's in that. And I was doing some research for a class, and I came across life coaching. Now, listen, I did all these classes, but this one class, just this one little, it wasn't even the majority of the class. It was just something I stumbled across in the research of life coaching. And it intrigued me. And I began to read more about it. And the more I read about it, the more I thought that's more what I want to do than actual counseling. And so I actually, stopped doing the counseling classes and started focusing on the coaching. Colleges were not offering degrees in coaching at that point. This would have been in '05, but there were some trainings. I looked through some of them. I enrolled in one and got my first certification in coaching. It wasn't until about 10 years later before I went back to school, a university, to get my degree. I got a master's degree in life coaching. But in between that time, man, I was watching videos, I was reading books, I was learning from other coaches, and I still do that. I'm a part of an organization called the International Christian Coaching Institute, where I continuously learn from them. I go to their conference every year in the fall. I'm just continuing to not just plant. It wasn't just that seed. It was taking that seed and cultivating that seed. So, and you could do that with anything. You may go, well, I'm not a coach. I'm not a preacher. What does that do for me? Listen, are you a dad? Are you a mom? Are you a husband? Are you a wife? Are you a friend? You could plant seeds in all of those areas and cultivate it and produce even more fruit.
Brother, I've been in sales for 43 years, and there's not a day that goes by where I'm not learning something.
Yeah.
It's really the truth. Some things might be reinforcing things that I may have learned or having me look at something a different way. But the moment you think you know it all, that's when you start to rot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I talk a lot about the 8 decisions you need to make to break through to your enthusiasm zone. And one of those decisions is the decision to never settle. And sometimes what causes us to settle is we think, okay, now I've arrived. I've got all the answers. I don't have to grow anymore. What is it? 40? How many years did you say you've been in sales?
43.
43 years. If there's ever a time you could settle, it's 43 years in. You ought to be able to settle, right? But no, I love Joe, because this is Joe's attitude, not just about sales, but about ministry and about life. He's like me. He's a lifelong learner. He likes to continue to grow, continue to stretch. And listen, we use those things we learn, absolutely, but we never get to the point where we go, I've got it. I've arrived. I've shared sometimes the illustration of Waylon Jennings. He was a country music singer from the 60s into the 90s before he passed away, I think. And there's an interview with him one time right after he had completed a new album. And somebody asked him if he was satisfied with it. And he thought for a second and he said, no. And then he said, and if I ever become satisfied, I'm done. That's the end of my career if I ever become satisfied. And what he was driving at is he never wants to be satisfied. He always wants to outdo himself. Whatever this album was, I want the next album to be even better. And that's the way our attitude should be in everything. Never settle. Even if you've been doing it for 43 years, never settle. Always look at how you can grow and become better in that. Continue to plant those seeds. It's kind of like getting to the point where you go, you know what? I've eaten enough food. I'm just going to stop. What happens if we do that? We die. We got to continue to put nutrients into our body. We got to do the same thing with our brain.
Absolutely.
Karen says, good evening, everyone. She also says you stay younger by continuing to learn. I love that. And you know what? There's a lot of truth in that. It doesn't mean that if you continue to learn, eventually you're going to go from 50 back to 20. That's not what Karen is saying. But what she's saying is, especially mentally, our minds continue to make new connections. Now, as we get older, it's true, those connections can slow down, but they slow down much more if we just stop learning. If we stop working our mind, we get into our routine, we've developed it, we're comfortable, and we never break out of that, and we never learn new things, well, then it slows down even more those connections, because every time we learn something, it builds connections. And when we reinforce it, it builds a stronger connection. It's almost like you're digging a ditch. Before you dig a ditch, water could just flow everywhere. But when you dig a ditch, or sometimes the flow of water will create a ditch itself, and then it all kind of channels into that connection. That is why when you get a seed planted and you begin to cultivate that, it builds it even stronger, because it's building a stronger connection, and all that information is being fed into that, just like water is into a ravine. And that's why, listen, we learn things all the time that we don't even realize we learn or know or anything like that, because we have the natural ability to focus on things. There's this exercise that Zig Ziglar used to do with your watch, and not as many people wear watches today, so it's a little more difficult to do. But he would say, now look at your watch. I want you to look at it really well. Just look at it very intently, and notice, is it Roman numerals, or is it actual numbers, or is it just, dots? And is it dots all the way around, or is it just in 4 places? Or is it just where the numbers should be? And is it round? Is it square? Is the face of it white, or is it gold, or is it silver? And he would get all of this stuff, and he would say, now just notice all of that stuff. And then he would go into something, and then he would say, now remember just a minute ago when you looked intently at your watch? And everybody's like, yeah. And he goes, what time is it? Of course, nobody knows, because nobody was looking at what time it was. They were looking at all the things they were talking about. That's the way our brain works. Our brain, there's others that do it with colors in the room. They have you notice the color in the room, and then you close your eyes, and then they ask you to list everything that's a different color than what they had you focus on. And you can't remember it as well. Why? Because you weren't making those connections. You were connecting when Zig Ziglar has people look at their watch like that, they're making connections to how the watch looks, not necessarily what time it is. Mm-hmm. There are things that happen around us all the time, and we are completely unaware because it's not connected. When I first came to New York, somebody was talking to me about pickleball. I'd never heard of pickleball before. And somebody was telling me about it. It was Margie, actually, asking me if I'd ever played pickleball. And I hadn't. And so I came home and I looked it up, and I thought, wow, this looks cool. And then all of a sudden I started seeing it everywhere. Why? Was it that it was just all of a sudden started popping? No, I started paying attention to it because a connection had been created in my brain to pickleball. And then the more I thought about it, there's probably 15, 20 other sports that I've seen, but I couldn't tell you about because I didn't have a connection there for it to flow through that. That's my psychology lesson for the day.
Brother, when Karen mentioned that comment, you stay young by continuing to learn, and then you started talking, it reminded me of like a balloon, where your head is like a balloon, and the more you intake, the more you learn, your mind expands like a balloon. Now, hopefully it won't pop, but the point I was getting at is, I wish I knew 40 years ago what I know today. A lot of the decisions I've made years ago, I wouldn't have made had I known And as I continue to learn, the decisions I'll make today, I'll probably, I don't want to say regret, but I might have done differently 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So you never want to stop learning. You never settle, as you said.
Yep.
Never settle. Because when you do, you're done. I mean, seriously, things are changing so fast. What you know today is going to be, I don't want to say obsolete, but it's going to change tomorrow.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And things are changing faster and faster every day.
Aren't they?
Yes. And if you don't keep up, you'll get left behind. Listen, back when John McCain and Obama were running against each other, one of the criticisms of McCain, and I'm not talking political policy or anything like that, but one of the criticisms of John McCain is that he had not kept up with technology. He didn't even have an email. And that hurt him with some people. Doesn't have anything to do with political policy or political philosophy or anything like that. It's just the fact that they felt like he had not kept up with the times. He had fallen behind because technologically he wasn't, he wasn't up to par with his technological advances. And so that will hurt you. Your intentions may be great. You may have the greatest ideas out there. But if you're falling behind, you're going to have less credibility with some people because of that. So, Christine is with us, and Christine has a prayer request. Prayer request. The Gunchinen family has lost their grandmother and mother today. From what I understand, this is not Christine's mother, who has not been doing well recently physically, but this is her son's grandmother on their dad's side, I think. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we want to pray for Christine and the rest of that family, especially her sons. This is their grandmother, Michael and Brendan. We want to be in prayer for them as well. So, Joe, do you mind lifting that up?
Be my honor. Father God, I just want to lift up Christine and her family and her sons in particular at their loss today. Father, when we love someone and when we have to let them go or they get taken to be with the Lord, it's painful and it hurts. And Father, we acknowledge that this evening, and we pray that you would comfort Christine, her sons, and their entire family, and just remind them that their grandmother is in a better place and that one day they'll be together. Father, we love you, and we pray all this in the precious and powerful name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you.
You bet, brother.
All right. Are we ready for the trivia?
You want scores?
We want scores.
I have scores. They're getting harder to read because they're like all over my paper. I don't have a very easy way to keep up with them. So if I don't say yours right, I'm sorry. All right. We've got several people on the board with one. That would be Laura, Angela, Aura, and Chris Klingon, who was quietly in the background last week. And Karen they all have one. Joan has 2. Christine has 2. William has 3. Mark Hendricks has 4. And Marianne has 6.
Woo-hoo.
Marianne is right at the finish line.
Right there. I don't believe I've seen them come on tonight. They may not be here.
All right. Here is the question. Have you got it ready to go up?
No. I don't even know which one it is. Is this
It's right
it?
there.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. Okay.
All right. Here's the question. When we talk about the purpose or philosophy behind Bible translations, we talk about 2 extremes. One extreme is thought for thought. The other extreme is what? That's the answer to the question. I'll read it again. When we talk about the purpose or philosophy behind Bible translations, we talk about two extremes. One extreme is thought for thought. The other extreme is what?
I abbreviated the question. Sorry. I'm limited to how many characters I can put down there.
Oh! Christine came right in front of Karen.
On my phone, Karen came before Christine. We got to go with what's on our computer.
We got to go with what's on the computer screen.
Oh, good job.
They are both correct, though. They are both correct. One extreme is thought for thought. The other extreme is word for word. And we've talked a little bit about that before. Thought for thought is when they take the original language and they go, okay, what is the thought that is being communicated here, and how do we best communicate that in English? In word for word translation, they go, okay, this is the word in the original language. What is the best English word for how this word is used in this text, in this context? And then they translate that word. Some of your more word for word translations are the New American Standard and the ESV, the King James and New King James. Those are more word for word translations. More thought for thought translations are the Message Bible, the Living Bible, the Amplified Bible. Those that are somewhere near the middle is your NIV. Is probably one of the closest. The Christian Standard Bible is real near the middle. The New Living Translation is not as close to the middle as the NIV and the Christian Standard. It leans a little bit toward the more of the thought for thought, but it's closer to the middle than like the Message or the Living Bible. And so there's just some examples of those. And one of the reasons the NIV is so popular, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, is I believe it does the best job of hitting the middle of those. Not everybody agrees with that, but a lot of people do, that it does the best job of being in the middle of thought for thought and word for word. But I will say, if you're doing study in the Bible, you need something that is in the middle, and you need one that is a thought for thought, and you need at least one that is word for word, and just to be able to compare those.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say word for word, and I talk about the New American Standard, the New American Standard is probably the most word for word translation that is readable. There is a Bible called an interlinear Bible, and there's a lot of different versions of that, oddly enough. But the interlinear Bible is actually more word for word than the New American Standard, but it's so word for word that it copies the sentence structure and everything else of the original languages, which makes it extremely difficult for English speakers to read it. The New American Standard is the closest word for word that is readable. But if you really want to do in-depth study, you could also get an interlinear Bible. And sometimes you can find those online as well for free, at least in segments. And what it does is it literally, like in the New Testament, it'll have it in the Greek, and then directly underneath the Greek, it'll have the English translation of each one of those words. And if you've ever read one of those, you know they're very difficult to read. They're good for study, but you can't just read straight through it. It's almost impossible. So Christine and Karen got it, but I think Christine got in there ahead of time.
Yeah, that was a close one.
Hey, right toward the end last week, we were asking if you had one question about life, faith, or the church, what would it be? which is a question we still have today, by the way. We would love for you guys to come up with questions and put them out here. We will discuss those. No question is off limits. Okay, so bring it up and we will discuss it. We're not saying we'll be able to always give you the answer for it, but we will talk about it and see if we can gain any ground on that. So if you got any questions out there, or if you don't, come up with a question, Google a question, and bring it to us, and we'll address it. But one of the questions that we had last week was, when is Jesus coming back? And that's a good question. That's a good question. You realize that Jesus, in the book of Revelation, which was written somewhere around 95 to 100 AD, so we're looking at, close to 2,000 years that it was written. And in that book, Jesus said, I am coming soon, or some translations say, I am coming quickly. And we got to look at that and go, Jesus? Usually if I use the word soon or quickly, I mean that a little faster than 2,000 years. Like if I tell my kids, you need to take out the garbage, you need to take it out soon. If they wait 2,000 years to take the garbage out, they're in trouble. Right?
Yes, they are.
Or even 20 minutes. If they wait 20 minutes to take it out, they're in trouble. So what did Jesus mean there? I'm coming quickly. Some people interpret that to mean, and there's a few different ways you can look at that. Some people interpret it to mean that in the grand scheme of things, when you look at throughout all of history, which is at the very least 6,000 to 7,000 years, okay, depending on how you look at how the earth was made and all that stuff. But at the very least, we're looking at 6,000 years. In the grand scheme of things, 2,000 years, I guess, isn't too long. And some people look at it like that, okay? In the grand scheme of history, maybe it is quickly, maybe it is soon. Others interpret that to mean that it doesn't mean the length of time it will be before he comes back, but it means in the way he will come back. He will come quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like that. It's not going to be long and drawn in. It's just he's going to come back. Now, we're probably not taking into consideration the whole spectrum of, the tribulation and the millennial reign and all that stuff. And that stuff. If you want to get into that stuff, come to our Saturday morning small group where we're going through the book of Revelation. Not necessarily going to get into all of that right now. But just in Jesus is coming back, there's another place in the Gospels, I think this is in Matthew, where he says he will come like a thief in the night. Like a thief in the night. How does a thief come in? They come in, they're you don't know. You don't know when they're coming, and it just kind of boom. It's not like, hey, you know what? In the next couple years, I'm going to come break into your house, so be ready. A thief doesn't do that. He just kind of shows up. Maybe that's what Jesus meant. He's just going to show up. I just want to make sure I'm ready. I don't know when he's coming. It could be before we finish the show tonight. It could be another 2,000 years. I don't know. You hear people say all the time, and this is the craziest saying, but you hear people say this all the time. I believe the end of time is closer now than it's ever been. Well, duh. It's not like it's getting further away at any point. Every day it's closer than it's ever been, right? Because we're getting closer to the end of time. But nobody knows when that is. And even Jesus said he didn't know.
That's right. Only his Father knows.
Yeah. Only the Father knows. And I heard somebody say one time that, listen, Tammy and I went to a church service one time in Jellicoe, Tennessee. This was before we were married. So this is probably 97, 98. And we went to this church service. It was a Church of God. It was holding a revival in Jellicoe, Tennessee. They asked me to come and do special music one night of the revival. And so I was there. The guy that got up and spoke, he spoke for an hour and a half. This was an hour and a half long sermon.
Look at Joe's eyes.
And for an hour and a half, he went through all these mathematical equations in order to come down to a pinpoint of when Jesus was going to return. I tell you what, I am not a numbers guy. And by the end of that message, I was exhausted. I'm glad they asked me to sing before the sermon and not after, because I would have not been able to put the words together had it been afterwards. I was brain dead by the end of that. There's been people throughout history trying to predict when the end of time. I think the Jehovah's Witness tried to predict it, I think, in 1947, sometime in the 40s. Of course, it didn't happen. And then there was a guy in the 80s. He wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988. And that book sold well. A lot of people bought that book. 1988 came and went, and Jesus hadn't come yet. He wrote a sequel to that book called 89 Reasons Why Jesus Will Come Back in 1989. That book did not sell as well as the first one. But everybody that's tried to predict when Jesus was going to return, they've been wrong. They've been wrong. And so this is what I like, and this is not original with me. I heard this, but it stuck with me. I'm not on the planning committee. I'm on the welcoming committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have any idea, and I don't even care to try to figure out any of that stuff. I just want to be ready when he comes. So that's a long answer to a short question. You got any input on that, Joe?
No, I'm with you. I'm on the welcoming committee. You know, and over the years, people have said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to sell my house and give everything away because this is the year that Jesus is coming." And then, obviously, that doesn't happen, and they're saying, "What did I do that for?" And I've heard that multiple times where people have kind of preached that this is the end, this is what's happening, and go and give it all away because we're called to do that.
Yeah.
And then it's regretting.
Yeah.
Jesus said only the Father knows. And I think that's the truth.
Yep.
And when you hear about him saying I'm coming quickly, or it's going to be quickly. To God, I've heard it said that 1,000 years is a blink of an eye. When you think of eternity being billions and billions of years, a couple thousand years is really pretty quick.
Right.
I mean, do the math. 2,000 divided by eternity is a small number.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. I think another one was it 2012, where the Mayan calendar ran out, and so everybody was predicting, it's going to be the end of time because that's the end of the Mayan calendar. Yeah. And the day after it ran out, I got up and I got on Facebook, and I quoted the lyrics to REM's song, "It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine." So,
I love that.
So yeah, guys, we don't know when he's coming back, and I'm looking forward to when he comes back. Maybe I'll be alive, maybe I won't when he comes back. And like Joe said, we just want to be ready. We just want to be ready. Just follow Jesus, continue to grow in your relationship with him, and just be ready when he comes back.
Hey, brother, I wanted to mention something too, because Sunday is Father's Day.
Yes.
And, this week I've been thinking a lot about my dad, who passed away a number of years ago. And I'd open it up to folks to kind of share maybe, one or two things that, kind of your dad either has, or if he's still alive, or, has kind of put on your heart. What are some of the memories of your dad if he's gone to be with the Lord? So I'd love to hear that. This is a special week for dads.
Yeah, that's great, Joe. That's an excellent focus for today. I will tell you, I've got a lot of memories of my dad. Some of them great, some of them not so great. But But one of the things that's always stuck with me with my dad is he always told me, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier in the show. He said, "Don't be like a strand of water, always trying to find the easiest way to go." And I probably heard him say that at least 100 times, maybe more. Don't always just go for the easiest way. Now, as I grew up and started making decisions, and I lived up to that. I didn't necessarily take the easiest route. Sometimes I think my dad thought, well, maybe I oversold that advice to him. Um, because I didn't. I've never been the one to go, oh, this is the easy way out, so this is what I'm going to do, or this is going to be the way I'll make the most money, so this is what I'm going to do. I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial mindset about me, and if you've got an entrepreneurial mind, or somebody with an entrepreneurial mind, you kind of look at them and you go, man, they've got to be crazy. Here, somebody defined an entrepreneur this way: they work 80 hours a week to keep from working 40. So, so that maybe we're not the smartest group in the bunch, but there's just something we feel like we got to get out there, and we take a different road. We take the road less traveled. We go about things a different way, and it's not always easy. You run up against brick walls, and you've got people that are not entrepreneurial minded that look at you and they think you're crazy and ask you what's wrong with you and why would you do that, and what about security, what about this, what about that, and listen, I've just never been one to take the easy route. I'm not saying that stuff is bad. I'm not. All of that stuff is good, and I've probably got more of that stuff now than I had early on because I was more reckless early on. I have matured in that, but I still haven't settled. I've never settled. I'm always looking for, how can we grow? How can we expand? How can we do more? How can we reach more? And all of that stuff, whether I'm talking about the church or parachurch ministry that I did a few years, for about 8 years back in the early 2000s, called Upside Down Ministries. Whether I'm talking about the enthusiasm zone where I'm going and I'm spending money to put on these retreats with no guarantee that I'm going to make my money back in that. But I'm not out there for guarantees. Somebody said one time that, of course, this was an entrepreneur that said this. They said a paycheck is something that a paycheck is something the world gives you to make you give up on your dreams. And listen, that there may be some truth to that in some situations. Sometimes people chase security more than they chase the direction that God is leading their life. And please don't misunderstand me. If you've got a 40-hour-a-week job and you're happy in that, and that's where you feel like God has led you, that's exactly what you need to be doing. You do not need to be doing that because you feel like you have no other options and you're just trapped in a job and you're there because of the paycheck and the benefits and an eventual retirement. If that's the reason you're at your job, make decisions right now to take steps to move out of that. Don't quit tomorrow, but begin making the decisions right now to step out of that and do something that you feel like God is calling you to do. A paycheck and benefits and retirement are not enough to sell your soul on. They're great if you got them while you're doing something you love. Great. Receive those benefits, receive that paycheck, receive that retirement eventually, whatever it may be, if you're doing what you feel like God called you to do. But if you're not, don't let that stuff distract you from what God is calling you to do.
There you go. There you go. Anyone else? Love to hear some of your thoughts about your dad. I'm going to share one that I haven't shared before. But I have shared that I'm one of 6 kids in a very, very strict Italian-American family. Very demanding. if we didn't do what we were supposed to do, if we were late, if we disobeyed, our dad beat us. And that was a tough scenario. He was also a perfectionist, and he played professional baseball with the Cubs in the AAA team. He played baseball in the Korean War, and as a result, my older brother and I were really good ball players. We played semi-pro ball, and growing up playing ball in Glen Cove in the what they call the Campanella League, my dad never came to my games, never, except for once. And it was almost like a storybook type of scenario where, I was on the on-deck circle. We were losing by 3 runs. It was the bottom of the 6th inning. I think we only played 6 innings. And the guy in front of me walked, and the bases were loaded. So I get up, and I see my dad pulling up in his car and walking down. Now, he'd never seen me since Little League. And I was excited that he was there. I was a little nervous because I didn't want to strike out. And it was a really good pitch. But long story short, I hit the ball and got a great hit. It was in right center field, and it went past the outfielder. And all 3 runs scored, and we tied the game. I was rounding second base, and I was going for third, and I got thrown out at third base. But we tied the score. Everyone was jumping up and down except my dad. And I walked over to him, and he said, "Why did you go to third base? You never go to third base and make the last out." And he was just disgusted. And he turned his back and he walked back to his car. And I don't say I was crying, but I was pretty distraught. And the coach came up to me and said, "What was that all about? Why did your dad?" And he said, "I'm going to come to your house tonight and talk to your dad." And I was like, no, please don't. That's the worst thing you can do. And I kind of, it's such a, that's 50 years ago I'm talking about. And I remember it was like yesterday.
Yeah.
It's not a real happy memory, but it's kind of like who my dad was.
Yeah.
You talk about never settling. I think one of the reasons I think I've had a lot more life balance than he did was because of him. It's like in sales, I've had some really bad managers and I've had some really good managers. And when I became a leader, I'm like, I want to be like all the managers that did well, and want to do none of the traits that the other people did. And having a bad person, and I'm not talking about my dad, but having a bad person throughout your life actually helped out as much as having a good person.
Yeah.
My dad beat his children, and I swore I'd never beat mine, and I never have.
Yeah.
I almost did. I should have a couple of times. And I'm falling off the screen here. I apologize. Here I am. Yeah.
Yeah. I had some similar experiences growing up, but good ones and bad ones.
Yeah.
So the thing about my dad as I got older, when I was about 14 or 15, I guess, our church, well, I guess it was a little before that, our church went through a church split. Yeah, and my dad wasn't going to church at all, and out of support for my mom, he started going, and eventually he rededicated his life to the Lord, and then later on he became a deacon in the church.
Oh my gosh!
And later on he became an elder in that church, and oftentimes would preach when the minister was out of town or on vacation or something, and he taught Wednesday night Bible study for, I don't know, 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years. But I could see a transformation in my dad as he became closer and closer to God. He had anger issues and probably would have admitted that later on in life. He would have never admitted that early on when it was at its worst. He just thought that's what dads are supposed to do. But yeah, I've had some of that. But I also remember in the 7th grade, this was weird because this was so unlike my dad. I was dating a girl who decided to run away from home. And I came home from school, man, I was distraught. I was crying. And my dad never wanted me to have a girlfriend when I was a kid because he thought it distracted from sports. I was mostly baseball. I was a baseball player as well. And every day when I come home from school, my dad and me would go out. If I didn't have regular baseball practice, then me and him would go out and we would hit baseballs or toss baseball, which sounds really sweet, but it wasn't always sweet. Everybody in the neighborhood knew when baseball season was in because they could hear my dad yelling at me from the backyard. But but this particular day, I came home and I was just distraught and I was crying, and I told him, I said, I don't think I could practice baseball today. And he said, why not? And then I told him what had happened, and I just began crying when I told him. And he sat me down beside him on the couch, and he just put his arm around me and hugged me and just said encouraging words to me. That was not my dad, at least at that point in my life. Later on in life, that became more like my dad. But at that point, that was not my dad. But I think for some reason, maybe it was the work of the Lord, he just knew that's what I needed in that moment. I didn't need a dad that was going, oh, what are you messing around with these girls for? You need to focus on baseball, which is what I expected him to say. But he didn't in that moment. And so that was pretty special.
Brother, what's amazing about the story about the church split, you think of a church split and you think of something that's horrible and bad and, for the church. And out of that bad thing, a blessing came out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that your dad came to be, with the Lord. I mean, I just think that's amazing.
Yep.
And, when I talk about my dad, and I shared his story and probably not in the right light, but he was also, he fathered 6 children and was incredibly dedicated and taught us all the value of family and never, going to bed mad when you were mad with one of your siblings, which we all, did. But to this day, I talk to all of my 5 siblings every week.
Yeah.
And we talk to our mom every day, so it's, yeah.
Yeah. You were talking about your dad being a perfectionist. My dad was a lot like that. And the joke as I got older, was this: the best way to torture my dad would be to tie him up and put a gag in his mouth where he couldn't talk, and then stand in front of him and fold up a map the wrong way.
Oh my gosh. That is right.
That would have killed him right there.
Karen's on the phone, and she remembers this from working with Jim Fegley when he was here. But he had it, like myself, had incredible OCD. And when he was in your office there, and he had everything in a certain spot on his desk, and what people would do is they'd go in there sometimes and they would move things around, and it would drive him nuts. It would drive him crazy. My mom's husband, when they moved down and lived in Florida, he was a pretty perfectionist and had OCD. And one of his things was in the bathroom, the toilet paper always had to be, though the paper would come closest to the wall. And my brother-in-law, whenever he went down, he would go in and just reverse it. And I just remember we had a family outing and, having dinner or something. And afterwards he comes out, he goes, who changed the toilet paper? I was like, what? Then I heard the story and I'm like, wow, sometimes the littlest things really make the worst effect.
Yeah.
Kind of funny. Karen's writing, my father spent a lot of time with me teaching me how to play tennis, which I loved. But on Sunday, he would drive me and my mother to church and go back home. I wish so much that he would have gone to church with us. Yeah. Karen, I share that. My siblings and I all went to St. Boniface in Seacliff. And every Sunday, our dad would drop us off at church and never came. And even on Christmas and Easter, he just never came to church, which was unfortunate. But
yeah.
Tell me, before the church split, did your dad not come to church at all, or did he come once in a while? Or
he would go every now and then. He would go Christmas and Easter and that type of stuff. And listen, he always read his Bible.
Okay.
Always read his Bible. Of course, he was a big reader up until he had a stroke in '02 and he wasn't able to read anymore. But before that, he was an avid reader. He's the only person I know that you remember the old World Book
Oh
encyclopedia.
yeah.
He read from A to Z, like straight through it, all the way through. He's the only person I know that read straight through. Most people use it as a reference. He looked at it as a book.
Did you guys have the World Book encyclopedias when you were growing up?
Yeah, we had them right there in the house.
Yeah. See, that was the internet back then.
Yes, it was.
You know, we didn't have a World Book encyclopedia, so we'd have to go to the library. And if you were doing a book report or something, you'd go to the World Book encyclopedia and get it. And they had like for 10 cents, you could make a copy on the mimeograph machine, and you'd take that home and plagiarize it. And no, I'm just. But I mean that's the way it used to be. You know? And now, I mean.
And then we would also get the every year, like in February, I think it would have the year World Book.
Oh, okay.
So we had like the A through the Z, and then we'd have like, I think it was like, I don't know, 78 or 79 when they first got these. So we would have year 70, 79, year 80, year 81. We had them all the way up until I left for college. I think they stopped getting them once I left for college because I was one of those weird people. I loved flipping through that when it came in and reading stuff, and especially a lot of it, they had a section on pop culture, and I was into music and stuff, and so I would read a lot in that section. But yeah, we.
So your dad was an avid reader. I was going to say, well, that explains it.
Yeah. He definitely passed that down to me.
That's a good quality to pass down, brother.
Yes. Now, my mom would read too. She didn't read as much as Dad did, and she didn't necessarily read for information. She read for enjoyment. She would read a lot of novels and fictional stories and stuff like that. And my dad would read some of that stuff too. He read Westerns, Louis L'Amour Westerns. He had a ton of Westerns. I never did really get into fiction. I could probably count on two hands the number of fiction books I've read since I've been an adult. But I do love information books, and especially personal development and growth books. But yeah, I kind of got that for both of my parents, but more so from my dad than my mom, because he was an avid reader.
That's awesome.
It was really weird because my dad passed away when I was 19, and 3 months later I met Tommy, and therefore I met, like, the next weekend I met his dad, my father-in-law.
His name was Elmer, by the way.
Yeah, Elmer. And my dad's name was Robert. So my dad was a dispatcher on the railroad, and my father-in-law was an engineer on the railroad.
Yeah.
So it was really odd that there were so many similarities. My dad passed away when I was 19 years and 3 months old. I knew my father-in-law for 19 years and 6 months. And there's a lot of really odd, like, similarities with both. They both loved Westerns. They both loved Louis L'Amour. And they're just
hunting and fishing.
Hunting and fishing, especially, yeah. So I think our dads would have gotten along very well outside of the engineer dispatcher thing, because engineers and dispatchers
typically engineers and dispatchers did not get along. So Christine says that her dad used to read murder mysteries.
Oh, okay.
So
there you go.
Yep. There's a lot of different things out there to read. And listen, guys, I encourage you to read. Even if you're reading fiction, you will still get information out of fiction books out of there. So plus, like we were talking about earlier in the show, it will help keep your brain young and active longer the more you read and the more you learn. So, you have any closing remarks, Joe?
No. I just want to wish everyone happy Father's Day and hope to see everyone on Sunday. We're going to have a special message on Sunday. We're going to be looking at God's fatherly heart and how knowing God and knowing that relationship could change every aspect of our life. Awesome. And it does. Yeah. Awesome. So looking forward to that.
Christine says, read and never settle.
Nice.
Words of wisdom right there.
Your book.
Oh, she's talking about my book. I thought she was talking about never settling. So read.
Look. Christine's plugging your book. There you go.
It's in our church library. If you want to read, you don't even have to buy it if you don't want to. It's in the church library. You can borrow it and read it. So
I love it.
All right, guys. Thank you for being on here with us. And Joe, I'm glad you brought up looking at fathers and memories of fathers. I think that was a cool way to close out our show. And looking forward to church on Sunday as we honor our fathers. And listen, if your father's still living, mine's not.
Mine's not. And
Joe's is not. And a lot of them are not. If they're still living, make them feel special that day. Mm-hmm. Even if they're so far away, all you can do is give them a phone call. Give them a phone call and let them know you appreciate them. All right. We love you guys, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for joining us.